Hello, and welcome to the Wellness Creator Podcast. In today's episode, we are going to talk about wearables and AI powered wellness tech and kind of the positives that we see coming out of this tech space and some of the detriments or traps we can fall in. And I think this is a really important conversation, Sandy, because we've just seen so much shift in the last 5-ish years related to wellness and tech. And I think we're going to see it transform in the next year or two more dramatically than I think than many of us could have ever predicted. So we just want to kind of like have a space to start having this conversation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because these devices come into our lives and they're kind of exciting and cool. And the I know we think very differently, but for me, I'm like, how is this going to affect me? And you're very much like, how is this going to affect society?
Yeah.
Um, I was writing something for next week on our blog, and I was remembering that I don't remember what year it was, but I used to have this little turquoise square plastic thing that every morning I would stick my thumb on and it would like flash a light, and it would read my HRV. And I didn't know what HRV was. I had never heard of that measurement, but the reason I was doing it is because it could predict illness.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
was a big like Ben Greenfield, like early biohacker in those days. I was a big fan
Yeah.
of his and I just bought whatever he said. So I bought this thing and I don't even remember how you got the number of HRV. Like there was no screen on it. Like, so I don't know if I had a phone. I can't remember. But anyway, I was fascinated that I could use technology to measure HRV, which then apparently would tell me, predict, the trend in it would tell me, hey, you're about to get sick or things are declining. I was fascinated. And from then, obviously that little thing doesn't exist, but there's Aura rings and there's Garmin watches and there's, the iPhone does so much and it's just Whoop bands. Like it's just endless the technology we have. And that's just personal wearables. Like there's a whole other
Yeah. Yeah.
side.
Yeah. It's so funny. I remember in maybe 2015, you and I think 2015-ish, we
Mm-hmm.
went to a yoga journal conference and these guys, like these other startup folks they came and met with us like in the basement to talk about like, do we want to integrate some kind of like wearable clothing tech into what was Nama's room at the time. And we were both like, what? Like
Mm-hmm.
they were like building wired tank tops and like,
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't think we've fully seen that come to fruition yet still. So I think we made the right decision on kind of walking away from that. But like
Yeah.
that was such a foreign idea. I remember
Yeah.
at the time to be like, who's gonna wear that? Like
Like,
who's gonna wear like leggings and tank tops that have all these wires in them so that the software can like track their movements and correct them?
yeah, I think to me the question always was like, what do I get out of it? Like
Yeah,
how would I benefit from that? And
yeah.
I couldn't
Yeah.
correlate that at all. So
But
it's
but now
wild.
I think, like, maybe there is a future for that, like, if it's, like, correcting posture or helping with things like, I have a tonal, and it's always, like, telling me to download the app and, like, turn the camera on so that it can correct my,
I don't know what a
like
tonal is.
oh, it's like a weightlifting machine, but it's a big screen, and I don't do it because I don't want the AI camera tool watching me. So I'm just
Mhm.
like, I'm good. I'll figure it out. But I do think like these sort of like posture correcting technology tools are kind of on the way. Um your story also, Sandy, of like the little thumbprint or fingerprint tool also reminds me of when I was trying to get pregnant with my daughter. I had gone off birth control like a long time before that because I kind of knew the truth about birth control, like early on the dangers and things. That a classmate of mine had died of a blood clot. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But I had like this like really early giant device that like tracked ovulation. It was so big, this big plastic giant thing that I kept next to my bed and took my temperature every morning. And I had
Mhm.
to order it from Germany. And my kid is like in middle school. So this wasn't that long ago that I was like tracking my ovulation with this like giant bedside German kind of archaic hardware device. And I think
Mhm.
like now everyone can do that like on their phones and on their
Yeah,
watches and with their rings, and
instantly.
like
Mhm.
it's just that's revolutionary how
Mhm.
fast that's changed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really come back always to, like, what's the benefit of knowing it? Because I was recently in a biking trip in Italy, and every single, well, 80% of them had Garmin watches, right? And everyone kept saying, I just love the data. I just love having the data.
Mhm.
I just love looking at the data. And my husband is like that too. And I'm like, okay, but what do you do with the data? Like, are you just, endlessly staring at these things for what? Like, what do you, well,
Yeah.
how is it helping you? And I think it's an interesting philosophical question that's all over the internet is like, do these things, again, in the personal wearable fitness space, like, does this motivate you? Does this make you do more? Like, or is it just like another place to steal your attention?
Yeah, or your data.
Or your data or your privacy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, Sandy, do you wanna kind of, like, share a little bit about your own experience, like, kind of
Yeah.
psychologically, your relationship with your own Garmin in the last few
Yeah.
months and, like, how it shifted?
Yeah, sure. So you and I both had Aura rings
Mhm.
since like 2018. It was before the pandemic, 2018, 29. I wore that thing every single
Yeah.
day, and I would occasionally look at it. It was measuring heart rate and HRV and gave you a sleep score and energy score and all that stuff. But because there was no screen attached to it, I had to go to my phone to look at it. So we were always into having that kind of data. But when we decided to go to Italy for this biking trip, I wanted something to measure my training rides, speed and distance and time and elevation, all those things. And Aura couldn't do that. So I decided to get a Garmin watch because my husband had one and he was always going on about all the numbers and I love the data. So I wanted just to be able to, compare apples to apples. Um, and it was so infuriating to me because the numbers I was getting back after the data during the rides was fine. It was the sleep data, it was the energy data, which they call body battery. It was all these scores of like whatever equations they do in the background. And I was so low on everything, and my husband wasn't. So part of the problem was I had somebody to compare to, and I was so low. And it was like, but I feel fine. Like, what is wrong with this damn watch? Like, it can't be right. This is so dumb. This is so stupid that we are putting so much time and energy and conversation into comparing our body batteries. Like, what is happening? And then I started to question, like, maybe Garmin is like really the data is like men and not women. Maybe this is just not made for me and my age or my athletic or fitness level or something. I started to just be really mad at it. Like this is like psychological abuse at this point because Garmin would say like, you're gonna have a shitty day.
Yeah.
Get up and at 'em.
I
I'd be
also
like,
felt that way about the Aura Ring, just to be clear. I had a
"Mm."
similar relationship to it, so I totally get it.
Like I don't need to be like it really did feel like abuse. Like I hated that thing, but I was still like morbidly curious. I couldn't like tear
Yeah.
myself away. But anyway, the long and the short of it is that I ended up having a thyroid problem. My thyroid had gone low, hypo, and I didn't know it. And that's why it didn't know it either, but it was giving me this data that was just so freaking off and terrible and low. And the moment I fixed that thyroid medication, adjusted it, it was all fine. And now I really like it because I'm not like getting yelled at by my Garmin. But it's an interesting question, right? Like philosophically, why didn't I check in with myself? Like
Mhm.
maybe there's some truth to this data, right?
Mhm.
Which is usually the opposite for most people. Like, it doesn't work. HRV doesn't indicate anything. But it really was telling me something. But I think the timing was a little unfortunate in that my thyroid dropped at the time I got the new watch. So all the data that I got from the watch seemed wrong, but I
Mhm.
just didn't consider like maybe there is something I need to examine. And for anyone who has hypothyroid, it's like, if it's not super severe, it's like, oh, you can just explain it away. Like it's anyway, it was wild. But now I'm fine and the data is interesting and I can see the good and the bad. Like I just never got into any good encouraging place with the Garmin, my little
Mhm.
friend, but now it's fine. So now I like it and now I've also got a little bit more boundaries around it. I'm not super obsessed with why it's always just literally yelling at me how terrible I am.
I think that's so funny. I think a lot of people fall into the trap of who have these kinds of wearables. Certain obsessive personalities, I think in particular, fall into the trap of like incessantly checking and then like allowing whatever that data
To
displays
drive.
as
Yeah.
to, yeah, to
Yes.
sort of like affect your entire day and how you live
Yeah.
your life. And I think that's the real danger. And I think you like started maybe to fall into that because of this issue, but thankfully you were it was like super helpful because you were able to correct the issue. But like
Hmm.
I think other people, they don't ever figure it out, or they just get super
Yeah.
competitive with themselves and they still are
Right.
like,
Yeah,
I
I don't
need to
have that
get this
gene. I don't
score
care if
today.
it's 49 and a
Yeah.
half floors. I don't need to get to
Yeah.
50 at all.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's part of like is, for some personality types it is really motivating, right? Like, oh, I just
Yeah.
need to get those 2000 steps in and that's not me.
Yeah.
But I get it, but then the question is like why are you being motivated by this? Like
Yeah.
I struggle with that whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. It wasn't until like just listening to you tell this story that I realized that I stopped wearing my Oura ring when I got sick with long COVID because it was
Yeah,
like
for
it
that
was so
same reason.
depressing to always
Yeah.
be sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like my readiness score was always abysmal for
Mhm.
many months. And then I just took the damn
Mhm.
thing off and it
Yeah.
didn't do heart rate variability. I don't know,
Mhm.
maybe it only during
It
when you
slept.
sleep.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So I needed like more data to like try to monitor my health. Anyway, so I switched to an Apple Watch. But yeah, that is like a very, I don't, demotivating, especially
Yeah.
when you don't know why. Because in the beginning I didn't know why my like
Right.
readiness
Right.
score was so
Right.
shitty. I didn't know that I had this like weird novel
Right.
mystery illness. Like I was like, what's happening? And so I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think that like we can fall into like, don't let the technology control you, like you control the technology, but that's
Mhm.
hard.
Mhm. But for me, it was flipped because I was like, that thing's wrong, that thing's wrong, that
Yeah.
thing's wrong. Oh, wait, it's right.
Yeah.
And so now I do put a little bit more stock into the numbers than I maybe did before because I was just it's inaccurate. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, it messes with your mind.
Yeah.
It really does. And then I remember, oh, this is year. I think this is when we started with our Aura rings.
Mhm.
We listened to a podcast by these two guys who were like, um, they were Swedish or something, and they were trying to go for 3 months without measuring data.
Oh.
And it was something like that. And this whole time with the Garmin watch, I was like, what would it be like to just, like it's this concept, like if I go for a bike ride and don't have my Garmin, did the bike ride even happen? Or if I go for a walk and I don't measure it, did it really even happen? Right. And like, what is it like to just take all this stuff off and go for a walk to enjoy it or go for a ride and just
Yeah.
doesn't matter how long, doesn't matter what your max heart rate is, just go for the pure enjoyment of it and do this technology get in the way of that
Yeah.
pure excitement and joy of living life and exercising and moving your body.
Yeah, I actually think that that does happen, and I think that everyone who uses these wearables should like plan in periods of abstinence. Like
Mhm,
that's kind of
mhm.
my philosophy is that like you should be able to take it all off for like a month and
Yeah,
not
and be
care,
okay.
to like
Yep,
detox from it.
yep,
Um, because I do think that like we start to get disconnected from
yes.
ourselves and knowing ourselves, like listening to our bodies and our intuition. Like when you just have a computer screen giving you data,
Mhm.
you kind of start tuning out like that part of you that
Yeah,
like in your belly knows what's going on. And to me that like actually, again, thinking of the difference between society wise, like I think that's a really
mhm,
dangerous concept that like all these people are walking around fundamentally disconnected from that part of themselves.
right, and disconnected from nature and the world and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
beauty and the wind and the
Yeah.
flower that they just passed or whatever.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that, it's childlike to go for an exercise, for a walk or a run or whatever, and just be present for every step and every breath and
Yeah.
everything that you see, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things for me, I became pretty addicted to the data because of my health situation and being sick for so long. And it was actually so helpful. And the doctors that I worked with,
Mhm.
some of them used the data from my wearables, like to help understand what was going on. So to me, it's like it's like almost like having a pacemaker, or it's like this
Yeah.
tool that I need. And
Yeah.
I definitely would not go and exercise if I'm by myself. Like even now, I will not exercise or like go on a long walk without it, because it's like a kind of a security blanket, but also if something happens to me, like someone will be able to look. This is so morbid, but like I feel like someone will
Like,
be able to look and
who
like
cares what
understand.
happened to her?
Yeah, or like if I like end up, unconscious or something, and then I
Mhm.
go to the doctor, we'll be able to be like, okay, your heart rate dropped to 30 beats a minute, and then
Mhm.
you passed out. And to me,
Right.
like that's kind of invaluable. Like the when you think about how expensive, at least in my country, medical
Mhm.
care is, like having that added data, like
Mhm.
it's just very practically saves you
Mhm.
money,
Yeah.
like and
Yeah, for
because
sure.
time with
Yep.
doctors, right? Like it, and so there it starts to get complicated.
Yep.
But and I do think that like, and this is maybe going to segue into like kind of AI tools and stuff too, but in the future, like these tools are going to start to directly replace a lot of the services that we've come to rely on from practitioners. Like they're going to augment that, I think, so heavily. That's what I think,
Mhm.
that like it will just be, I mean, I don't want to speculate on like what kind of doctors will still exist and what kind of specialists and what kinds won't,
Mhm.
and like what a doctor's visit looks like in 6
Yeah.
years from now, but I think it will be profoundly different.
Yeah, I'm sure that's very true because I remember, and again, this was part of thyroid. I had some racing heart,
Mhm.
and I could measure it on my watch. And I told the doctor, and she's like, "That's not accurate. That's
Yes.
we don't
Yes.
go by that." And I
Yes.
was like, "But I've got the graph to
No.
show you. Whether it's actually
Yeah.
that number or not. Like there was a change, there was a delta there." And she's like, "No, we don't do that." But the other to that point, the other thing with my recent thyroid in the summer before I traveled was to confirm it. I dug into the Garmin data to look at body temperature, which wasn't something I would ever look at. I didn't even know if they could measure it. But that consistent negative every single night was my body temperature was low, which is a sign of hypothyroid.
Yeah.
And that confirmed it, right? And so, like you're saying, that was like the piece I would, okay, for sure. And
Yeah.
again, a lot of doctors don't believe that's kind of controversial, but it happened to be right. Like my
Mhm.
body temperature is right on every single night after I adjusted my meds. So, um, I don't know. I think there is more acceptance with the Western medical doctors now, but I think you're right. It's going to definitely
Yeah, whether they like it
augment
or
what we
not,
do.
it's
Mhm.
changing. I
Yeah.
mean, I just want to, yeah, I got into multiple arguments with doctors and like cardiology nurse, whoever answers the phone about my heart rate data in my Apple Watch. And I was like, look, like this is real. I don't know what, I mean, you were an idiot if you don't believe me. This thing does not come off my body. And
Mhm.
like to act like it's irrelevant is idiotic. Like
Yeah.
it was, and I think that that's not those arguments, like that we are the, white coat wearing cavalry that's coming
Yeah.
in, and we are the only ones who are
Yeah.
somehow, able to decide what data is accurate or not, is just such bullshit at this point. Like
Yes.
we're all walking around with tools that are like more powerful than any supercomputer was 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they're waking up to that, but it's slow as
Yeah.
everything seems to be
Yeah.
in Western medicine. But you wanted to share something about what Elon Musk was
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about?
So I saw on X the other day, and it was not surprising to see this, but like Twitter's version of ChatGPT like of OpenAI is Grok. And Elon Musk posted this like one sentence um post the other day that was basically like, hey, if you have an MRI report or a CAT scan or what X-rays, like upload them to Grok, and we're training it basically right now to read those documents. It's like we're still in training now, but it's going to be really good soon. And
Uh-huh.
people are like, oh, can I upload lab results? And he's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So of course, like the little the part of my brain that like cares about privacy and security is like, oh my God, we are in the world where we are uploading our like medical data to Grok. But I think people are already doing that with ChatGPT too, right? Like with all of them and all of like the medical focused AIs. And I mean, I think that's real. Like you want to talk about where things are going, like that, like to have one human who very well could make a mistake because they like are reading their radiologist is reading your report while they get a phone call, right? So people get second opinion. Like now you have like like this huge percentage of all of like the MRI results that have ever been read, compiled into some sort of like machine that can accurately understand data at scale. Like this is so revolutionary and first of all so cheap comparatively to have working with a doctor, a specialist. And second of all, like it's probably going to be so freaking accurate compared to a human.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that people are going to push back, some people, especially whose livelihoods depend on that. But like that is here. Like it's not even in the
Mhm.
future. Like you can now upload your damn lab results. And I've done it not with Grok, but with a different AI. I have uploaded lab results. I have uploaded genetic results, and I have been like astonished in the best possible way at what I'm given back. Like it is so powerful what we have in our hands for basically free or $20 a month or $10 a month or whatever you pay for an AI tool.
Mhm.
But with
Yeah,
a
that
giant
that's
risk of like China and everyone else having all of your private medical data.
yeah, yeah, that is wild, but it does make sense. It totally makes sense. And
Yeah.
I will always be an advocate that you will need a human being to help you interpret this stuff because there's no one machine that I think is going to replace that entirely. But even in Canada, like I get my lab results before I see the doctor, and I always go and figure it out what it means, just like regular, even just
Yep.
blood work. I look to see what everything means before I go into the doctor. So their jobs have to significantly change in the way that they
Yeah.
communicate. They are not that all powerful anymore. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think that's what would China do with it, people's private.
I mean, so the conspiracy theory answer to that, Sandy, is that they'll target people with certain like pre-existing conditions or genetic dispositions that like you can start to target people with certain diseases. Like it can be through weaponry, right? Like people who have
Mm,
this genetic, you know, uh, ish, like these genetics are gonna like be more affected by these foods or these pathogens or whatever. I mean, that's I think the fear, or just, like you have this genetic anomaly, you're not allowed in this country, or, like who knows? I
mhm,
mean,
mhm.
you think about all like the scary bedtime stories and like things we've learned through history of what's possible if you know what's inside of a person. I mean,
Yeah.
I think all of that could come to play. I also think it could just like we could just live in a world where people have much better access to information that saves their lives or improves their quality of lives. Like I'm like pretty, as you can imagine, and it's probably pretty obvious to anyone listening to this, like I'm pretty interested in technology. I also really understand that there's a downside, but I'm sort of like, yeah, but I'm alive right now and this is kind of amazing. So I was like one of the first people to like do 23andMe and all the stuff, right? Like I have all of the data. And it's like now that we have AI tools that can interpret raw genetic data, like that was all kind of like fun for the first whatever dozen years of having that data. Now, I feel like I have the most powerful information
Mhm.
possible, and I'll just share one thing, like a very personal thing that I think might be interesting to folks who are listening, which is that my mom died of a blood clot during chemotherapy as part of a chemotherapy treatment. And I, through my genetic research through AI tools, and I mean, I had these reports also, but like I was able to discover a genetic mutation that made it much more likely that the chemotherapy drug that she was taking for her cancer was contraindicated for someone with this genetic predisposition,
Hmm.
right? So, like, we didn't have that data when my mom
No.
was fighting cancer, right? So, like, who knew? Like, who knows what your genetics are? Like, I don't know. But now I know. Like, speaking of doctors and nurses, I had some lab work done recently, and I was going over it with a nurse on the phone. I brought up this genetic mutation, which is a very common mutation, by the way, and I have it. And I just said, okay, well, given this mutation, are any of these medications and interventions you're proposing contraindicated? And she said, and I know I've already told you this story, Sandy, but I'll just say it for emphasis. I kid you not. I don't know what words you're saying. And I mean, that is why the industry is going to have to change. Like, health and wellness is going to have to shift pretty dramatically, because I get that I'm like sort of at the extreme end of intense and like gone down the rabbit hole. But I mean, I'm walking in with papers, like I have information, and like if and like I think it's unrealistic that a human being, like a nurse or a doctor, they can't know everything that a computer
Right.
can know.
Right.
Like,
Right.
and so I don't blame, I mean, it's not like I'm going to sit here and ridicule that person, although I think this is a pretty common thing they should know about given their job, but still, like I think there's lots of scenarios where it would be like, I have no idea what you're saying, because how would you? You've never seen a case like this
Hmm.
in your life or
Hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
But guess what? The computer has seen it. The
Yeah.
robots have seen it. So anyway, I just think that's like, we start with the Garmin watch, but then like the like the like somewhere along farther down is like
Mhm.
your entire health and
Yeah.
well-being, using technology to improve that
Yeah.
and to protect it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's remarkable. I don't have that fear with, I mean, like I would be cautious with privacy, but I'm also like, let's just see what this does,
Yeah.
like it could help me. I would much more appreciate the possibility of help immediately if I was struggling with something versus like worrying that China or
Yeah.
whomever
Is
is,
gonna like
it's
come
just,
after you with a pathogen because of
yeah,
your
like I just
genetic.
said to the world I have a hypothyroid. Like I don't think like I I
Yeah.
don't I don't
Yeah.
care. People know that. Like it's not,
Yeah.
it's so common and whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think for the listeners, where are you being influenced by technology in your wellness journey, in your health journey? I'd love to know fears, like what people are afraid of when it comes to this stuff. And I also think just one other point is like when a company like Whoop, for example, they have Whoop is a band, no screen. You have to go to the app to get the data. Measures, I think, all the same things. But those companies like Whoop, I've heard the chief science officer or something like that speak on another podcast, Diary of a CEO, and it was fascinating what they're doing with that data.
Mm.
Like fascinating, to look at trends or like cohorts of 40-year-old women who are da, 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 da. Like
Yeah.
it was a lot of sleep data, that particular episode, and I think that's incredibly helpful to society to
Yeah. Yeah.
understand that,
Yeah.
right? So I'm fine to give the data to those, like Garmin's probably doing something with my data, I don't know, but I'm not too worried
Yeah.
about it for
Yeah.
the better good, for the good of the whole. I think it's worth it to me at this point.
Oh, 100%. And I actually think that it's like better data for studies than like
Oh,
sort of traditional epidemiology
yes,
studies where you have to like
yes,
recruit certain people, and there's like
yes,
bias in recruiting and only certain people will sign up
yes,
for those things. And
yes.
I remember when my daughter was a baby, we lived in Seattle, and there was a lab, like a baby behavior lab at the University of Washington. I don't remember what it's called, but it's this like, I don't even know how I got roped into this thing, but she wore like a
Mhm.
watch around her ankle for like the first few weeks of her life. It was so big on her little tiny ankle. And then we would go in once a week, and they would like play with her and try to interact with her and like look at whatever data was on the little
Huh.
watch. And like that's like what it was like 12 years
Yeah.
ago, right? And
Yeah.
now that like it probably looks very different, and I'm sure the data is better because like there's way more babies and being studied, and like when you have a bigger data set, your data is going to be better,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the outcome is going to be better. I do want to say one more concern besides the like China stealing all of our health data and then weaponizing it. I think like another concern is also just in the bias of how the technology and algorithms are designed, or if they're AIs, like what
Yeah.
data is fed in to make them. So if you're starting with something that's bad or biased, like the outcome is still going to be bad or biased. And I think that's harder than maybe to like tease apart or understand. So it's not like just because it's modern and AI
Right.
powered or something, it's better. Like there's still risks,
Mm-hmm.
but hopefully we have responsible companies with responsible boards of directors who are helping to make sure that doesn't happen and building safeguards against that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, well, there you have it, folks. I am sure this is a conversation that is going to continue to happen in our industry. I think it's relevant to everyone who's working or interacting in the world of wellness. I'm sure we will have further conversations here on this podcast. And in the meantime, I encourage you to head over to our blog, wellwellwell.blog, and read Sandy's recent article and blog post about her experience with her Garmin watch, and you can even see some of the screenshots and understand some of the things she was talking about.
The abusive messages I was getting. That's right. Thanks,
And
Jenny.
yeah, thank you, Sandy. We will see you next time.
Bye.